I'm Britton LaRue, and this is Moon to Moon. Moon to Moon is a space to consider, celebrate, and share the ways we come home to ourselves, anchor through change, and uncover our power. 1 month, one phase, one loving step at a time. Dear Moon to Moon, it's Britton, and I'm very excited. This is a special episode because this is the first Moon to Moon episode ever where we talk about human design. And it's kind of funny that it's taken me so long. It's like, what's that about? Given that I'm pretty obsessed with human design and began to study it quite seriously last spring, 2023. And I feel very comfortable with body graphs and with the language. I don't know why I haven't brought it on to Moon yet, but here it is. Now is the time. Now is the unfurling of human design as another wisdom language, as another system of delineation, as another way of connecting with other human beings. And I'm excited to bring this to those of you, especially who love human design or are about to love human design. My guest today is Kelsey Tortorice, who is the human who gave me my very first human design reading, and we talk about that. And I met Kelsey through Jonathan Coe, another one of the many, many humans that I've been introduced to because of Jonathan, who many of you in Moon to Moon know. I'll put a link to Jonathan's work in the show notes. So Jonathan is really the one who just kind of illuminated the richness of the world of human design. And I began to dabble. And I really dabbled a long time before I decided to get serious. And it's kind of like any other language that I've learned, whether it's French or astrology, is that even as you're gaining fluency in this language, you just keep bumping into more you don't know. You know, there's just so much to learn that it can be overwhelming. And also, you got to start somewhere, beginner's mind. And what's really cool about human design, which I think it really may even have even more than astrology, and maybe even more than the tarot as another wisdom system, is that you can really just study the most basic parts and it can change your life, like with great simplicity. So it kind of becomes a surprise when you find out how actually complex it is, because it was like, oh, I thought you were simple. You're like really complicated. And so you can let that in at your own pace. So for those of you who already have been learning human design, you're just really going to love this because it's a long conversation and we talk about all kinds of really fun things. We talk about both our body graphs and we also talk about our astrological charts because Kelsey's also an astrologer. So it's two astrologers who are nerds for human design. Kelsey knows way more about human design than I do. But we also have a very particular topic here, which is in the language of human design, and we're going to define this. We're going to be talking about the 5th line profile. So some of you were like, I know exactly what you're talking about. Some of y'all don't. That's okay. inviting you to, just like with astrology when you're first learning, just allow the language to wash over you, trusting that you will pick up things consciously and also unconsciously that are lighting you up and resonating. And those things are going to take you to another thing, and they're going to connect you to another like teacher or space for more information to guide you. The fifth line profile is something that Kelsey and I both share. I'm what's called a 3-5 and Kelsey is a 5-2. And we talk all about this and define it deeply. But let me cut to the chase real quick and get to a big point that I want you to receive at the front end, which is that Kelsey is co-facilitating a community learning space and a community experiencing space is what it feels like to me, called Heretic Haven, because heretic is the archetype that we associate with the fifth line. And it's basically a haven, like a happy home for those of us who have a pronounced, strong experience of what it is to be a fifth line person. And what kind of awarenesses can be helpful and what sort of tools and skill sets can be helpful. And also, how is it helpful just to be around other people who also are navigating this experience? So I have signed up. For Heretic Haven. If you're listening to this late March or early April, we are beginning April 10th. So Heretic Haven. I'm going to have all the links in the show notes. And guess what? You can have 55 for fifth line. You can have $55 off of enrollment with my special code as a friend of Heretic Haven. Thank you, Kelsey, for giving me this special offer for Moon to Moon listeners. I'll also be sharing this in my newsletter and in Instagram. The code is Moon to Moon 55. Moon to Moon 55, all one word. And you get $55 enrollment, whether you choose to pay in full or whether you do one of the payment plans. So remember that on the front end. If you are a fifth line person, if you're a 5-1, a 3-5, a 5-2, and I think we were talking about the other one being 2-5. If you have one of those profiles in human design, then please come and join us. It's going to be really fun, and we're going to learn a lot. And I think there's going to be some really powerful collective gnosis that comes through here in this space. So I just felt immediately called to it. As soon as I saw the promo on Instagram, I was like, oh yeah, just really felt it. But I'm an emotional authority, we say in human design, which when you have emotional authority, it's best to wait till you've kind of ridden the waves of your emotions a little bit before making decisions, because you kind of need to see how you feel about it under different moons, in different vibes on different days. And my yes stuck. So I said yes. So Moon to Moon 55 to join us. You can go to heretic-haven.com, or is it hyphen? Don't worry. Just go to the show notes. Okay, so let me tell you Kelsey's official bio. Kelsey is a post-capitalist astrologer, teacher, human design experiMentor, capital M for mentor, and community initiator. They are a student and teacher of the Maia, seeking to understand and universalize the mechanics of reality within the context of individuality, cosmos, and consciousness as a whole. Their work facilitates upheaval, disrupting homogenized programming, and reorienting people to their differentiated truth and inherent wholeness. Thank you, Kelsey, for this wonderful and inspiring bio. I feel this from you. And also, happy birthday. I'm recording this on Kelsey's birthday because Kelsey is an Aries sun. Sagittarius rising, Sagittarius moon. I'm so happy to know Kelsey, and I'm so excited to begin to learn more with Kelsey and see what happens in Heretic Haven. Here we go. Welcome to Moon, Kelsey.
Hi, Britton.
Thanks for coming in.
I'm so excited.
So usually in interviews, I like to start with how we know each other just to ground into our human connection. And I feel like I found out about you through Jonathan Coe, a shared friend of ours, who loves learning very much, as I do. And Jonathan was talking about human design, and they recommended a reading with you to begin exploring my human design body graph. And I loved that you had an astrology background, so I figured we could speak the astro language while we ground into my body graph. And that was the beginning of my fascination with human design. I had so much fun having that reading with you. I remember you shared about my open ego, just like it just maybe isn't in an alignment to, I think you said something like commit to something in a long-term way. And I was like,
Yeah.
whoa, that is some serious permission.
Mm-hmm.
Whoa, in a culture that values consistent commitment.
Mm-hmm.
Like being able to recognize when you're ready to shift to a new direction. That was a big one for me at a time when emergence was becoming one of my major keywords. And then I just ever since I've loved following your work. I love your voice. I love learning with you through Instagram. And then I saw that you were starting this new Instagram handle called Heretic Haven, which we'll be talking about, for those who have a 5-line profile. And since I'm a 3-5, and we'll be defining all these as we go, I immediately was like, what is this? We have to talk about this, because I had been talking with Jonathan over the last 6 months about um I I feel like in the world that we live in, I long for more education around the projection field, how it works, and how to support ourselves. So all of these things we'll talk about as we go, but this is how we connected. I guess you probably found out about me from me booking that appointment.
I think so. I was trying to remember this morning if I maybe followed you prior to then or not, because we do have a lot of like astrology mutuals, both like friends and follower wise. But I can't, definitely my first like memory of you was that call. And I remember feeling really excited. I always am excited. So I'm a fifth line manifester, and I'm always particularly excited to introduce other fifth lines and other manifestors to human design, because there's, as we'll talk about, there can be a lot of grief in like the process of coming to awareness about what it is to have this fifth line archetype as a part of your profile. And then I have experienced something similar with being a manifester and having what we refer to in human design as a closed aura. There can be a feeling of like isolation and grief around that. So I always find a lot of excitement and also like comfort in being able to share with other fifth lines and other manifestors what I've learned through my own experimentation with human design and how it's helped me to just accept like the life that I have and the vessel that I am for what it is, and stop trying to fight against the grain of it, but also, validate and affirm the challenges of those experiences. So that's one of the things I remember, is just being really excited to share fifth line stuff with you. And I love that like one of the major takeaways for you was undefined ego stuff, because man, that's really like for anyone who has an undefined ego, which is 70% of the population, that's like at the core of your shit. Like that's like, I don't know if you're familiar with the tool not self hierarchy in human design.
Yes, yes, yes.
It's such a cool tool.
So cool.
Yeah. So for you, like all of your quote, not self stuff, and to take human design language out of it, sometimes I like to define that as like where your mind self sabotages you and pulls you away from your truth and your organic flow and your trajectory. And in your case, as a generator, your satisfaction. The culprit of all of that for you is the undefined ego at the top of your not self hierarchy. And so that's one of the things that's so cool about human design is like, it's such a complicated system, but there's so much like simple, practical information in it that you can sit down with someone for 90 minutes and like show them, like help them attune to this truth, this like differentiated truth within themselves that they will never be able to unsee. Like it's so deeply impactful and you can get so much out of it from a single session. So, and the other thing I wanted to say about meeting you and meeting you through Jonathan is that it's like so especially rewarding and fun and comforting for me to get to share human design with other astrologers, because when human design came into my life, it like kind of it in some ways it sort of shattered, and this continues to be the case for me, the way that I thought about astrology. Like when you're experimenting with human design, there's so much like ego mind shattering that happens in cycles, and in some ways it really like challenged the way that I use astrology. And so it's been a lot of like figuring out how to put the pieces back together for how I work with one cosmic system that still like resonates and fits within the way that my whole orientation is shifting via human design. But the other thing is there have been so many people in the astrology community that like hardcore project onto human design. Um, in like a really like villainizing way. And so that was another part of my human design experiment that was pretty isolating at first, was like feeling really rejected by people within the astrology community for practicing it. And so it's been so lovely over the last few years to watch like this little pool of astrologers who also work with human design growing. And I'm just so grateful to be able to have conversations these days with people who are working with both languages.
Yeah, thank you for saying this. It's it's so weird. Like that's my favorite thing about human design is just like what it was channeled over like a week, and he saw all this stuff and everyone's just been riffing and
It's
building
absurd.
it, and like
It's
it
truly
is
absurd.
so ridiculous, but like shit, it is so real too.
So
It just
real.
resonates so deeply. And yeah, I did want to come back to that first reading and name that. I remember at the end, you here you'd shared all of this new kind of brain melting new information for me about myself through the language. And there was a part of me that was like, I got to get all the books, or I got to figure out how to learn all this. And you were just like, I think you just take these, these like three main points, just start practicing this in your daily life, just see how it goes. There's nothing else you need to do here. And it was like, whew, that was so relaxing. It was probably 2 years of me doing that. Just like I followed that homework, and then I just had this knowing like I'm ready to go deeper. And that's when I went to study with who you studied with, right?
Mm-hmm.
Amy Lee and John Cole.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's Human Design Collective, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I went through um Living Your Design and Rave ABCs. And now I'm just like, pause, hold,
It's so
let
much
it
fun to
integrate.
do. Yeah.
I gotta
Yeah.
live this for a while. And I just went through my Uranus opposition, which is such a big deal in human design, and
Mm.
having that technology with me through that year was really, really helpful. But yeah, so how did you find human design, and how do you define it for anyone listening who's like, sounds great, but what is this?
Yeah. Which should I start with? I'll start with how I found it, I guess. How did I find it? It's so interesting because like when I think about my entry point to astrology, I literally remember a specific scene, like two specific scenes. One, the first time a friend drew my natal chart And I have this like dramatic replaying of it in my head where she was on the couch, like putting my birth data in, and she like turned her head to me 90 degrees and was like, Kelsey, you're like all fire. I've never met anyone who's all fire before. You're so powerful. So I have this like very dramatic moment. And then the next scene is like a week later. I'm just like ferociously scrolling on my phone, reading like my cookbook astrology from all my placements. And it was just like one and done. Like I was in for good. I was in the astrologer rabbit hole for good. That was like sometime in 2015. And I reference that just to say I don't have a distinct moment with human design like I had with astrology. I remember like the first time I heard about it was in passing on like podcasts here and there. And I remember looking at my design and seeing like 5-2 emotional manifester and seeing the body graph and being like almost immediately put off, which I think is what a lot of people experience, which is it makes sense when you get into it and you learn about the mechanics of it and you learn about the frequency of the person who it came through. Him being like a 5-1 splenic manifester. It's like very people. I'll try to just define the pieces of that I think are relevant. Like he repels people. He's easy to project upon. You either pedestalize him or you hate him typically. And he has kind of this like harsh tone to him, being a splenic manifester. And so the system, the language itself came through him. So it has his frequency on it. And it can be really off putting to people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, part of what was off putting about it was just like, I saw that it took my birth data, and I'm like a fluent astrologer at this point, right? And I could not understand what the body graph was. Like there's all these shapes and all these lines, and there's no explanation of where it comes from. And I know it somehow comes from my birth data, so I'm imagining that my natal chart has something to do with it, but there's no one's drawing those lines for me. So I just like I had a little bit of a hard time buying in immediately. It just kind of like came in one ear and out the other. And then at some point a year or so later, I was hearing another thing in passing and I wanted to investigate a little further. And at that point, I think it was like identifying my aura type as a manifester, which were pretty rare manifestors. And the kinds of things people say about manifestors right up front are pretty like unsettling. But at the same time, like being a non-sacral, which about 30% of the planet is, all non-generators are non-sacral. There's something that I think non-sacrals tend to immediately resonate with when we learn that we're not like 70% of the planet, in that we do not have regular replenishing energy resources to keep going. And so, this was right around my Saturn return, which is like when we say in human design, you start to kind of have to reckon with the consequences of not living as yourself. So I was like dealing with a lot of burnout. And anyways, long story short, I guess I heard about it a bunch on different podcasts, and it took a year longer for me to actually like sit down and do the level of investigation that got me to the point where I understood it enough and like resonated enough to feel compelled to dive in more. And I think from that point it started with like a 3-hour like YouTube investigation one day, and then more podcasts, and then about a year later, like at some point in 2020, I started formally studying with John and Amy of Human Design Collective. So yeah, that's my probably could have been shorter, but abbreviated story of coming into human design.
Yeah, it kind of has to drip in. Do you feel like these days your work in the world is more astrology focused or more human design focused, or does it continue to be both?
It continues to be both. It's like there's been this like self-attunement and this kind of like attunement of conceptualization that's happened through my human design experiment that I like can't unsee. It's almost like a visual that comes to mind for me a lot when I'm talking about human design. So maybe this will be helpful for the second part of your question that I haven't answered yet, defining it. I'm not going to define it yet, but this but this helps a little bit, like the body graph. And maybe it might be good for people if they don't know their human design to pull it up, because I'm going to be referencing some things and people can at least have the visual of their design in front of them. Just Google free human design chart. There's a bunch of different places you can do it. But I often picture the body graph as like I often picture like drawing with a, when you were a kid, did you ever like draw with a glue stick on a piece of paper and then sprinkle glitter on it and then like shake
Yeah.
it? You're a Pisces placement, so of course you did. Um, so I picture the body graph as like the whole body graph, like all the channels and the 9 centers and the 64 gates are like the white page of paper. And then your definition, your activated gates, your defined channels, your defined centers are where you put the glue stick. And
Mm.
then everything else is the glitter. So if you throw glitter on the body graph and then you shake it off, your definition is what sticks with you, what's always there, where the glitter on the parts without the glue stick is the conditioning, the variance that comes and goes, that has to get filtered through that consistency of your definition. The reason I'm bringing up in this moment is because it's almost like my glue stick changed when I started studying human design. And so now it's like the things I pay attention to in astrology and the things that I kind of like really register and resonate with and like integrate into my own awareness are different than pre-human design. It's like human design has created this new glue stick shape for the way that I pay attention to reality,
Mm.
in general, but also to my subjective reality. And so it's kind of like created this different filter. It's like I'm working with a different filter for astrology now that I'm like 4 years into my human design experiment. But astrology is so intuitive to me. Like it just makes so much sense to me. In a way, it makes more sense than human design. Like the kind of perfect geometry of astrology is more obvious to me. And I feel like I can work with it really organically and really consistently. Whereas human design, sometimes it just like requires a little bit more of a leap of faith. I don't know if that's
Hmm.
the best way to say it, but it is just so weird. And like you said, there's so much that's just like so real about it. You can't unsee, but it does kind of, I think, require a little bit more surrender and faith and experimentation to validate. So I still get so much out of it, like contextualizing my experience and reality through astrology, but it's just kind of like my it's like my discernment has a new gatekeeper almost, if that makes sense. Like
Yeah.
I have a different filter for how I work with astrology now, and it's certainly changed the way that I work as an astrologer. Like I speak about natal charts a bit differently than I used to. I definitely think about transits very differently than I used to pre-human design. And yeah, just like my whole orientation to consciousness has taken a slightly different shape since human design. So but astrology is like, yeah, it's just so it's so intuitive to me, and I have almost a decade more, something like that, 8 years or something more experience with astrology. So I'll never be able to unsee astrology either, you know. And I do find that there are things that the language of astrology offers me that maybe are available in human design, but like I haven't tapped into uh how to get those things from human design yet. So for me, it's still just so it's just natural. It's natural, organic, and fruitful to blend both systems together.
Yeah. Thank you. Like for me, I think the vibes of my chart, the vibe of my chart is very different to me than the vibe of my body graph. In the sense that, like, um, for those who know body graphs, like I have all these defined centers. Like I'm just very defined. Um, and I had this idea of myself as so Piscean, and like this idea of myself as someone who um doesn't
So
need.
open.
Yeah. Yes.
Mm.
It's allowed me to actually uh, feeling my body graph and the permission of it actually like allows me to actually understand the malefic aspects of like the Aries rising, Capricorn moon, these kind of like more hard-edged parts of me. I feel like my body graph has given me like an energy system or like given me a system for permissioning, like this is how I am, okay? And then I can go back to my chart and like see these invitations of my natal chart through that lens. I don't know if that's kind of what you're describing, but
I think
um
so. That feels very close to how I've like re-experienced my natal chart after attuning to my human design.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so helpful to have them side by side. So yeah, I guess how do you define human des like how do you for
Mm-hmm.
someone for I'm imagining you get a lot of beginners. Like what's kind of your
Yeah, I
favorite
love teaching beginners. Um, there's a few different angles. So if I'm gonna try to just like explain what it is, like from a where it comes from kind of angle, I'll usually talk about how it's a synthesis of multiple ancient knowledge systems and multiple ancient kind of energetic and divisions of consciousness systems.
Mm,
Right? That's how I think about astrology first and foremost. To me, like, you know, a lot of Hellenistic astrologers, and I have a Hellenistic background too, seem to really like to talk about how the planets are more important even than the
mhm,
zodiac. I don't know. My brain is just like, we don't need to like put our colonial hierarchical systems onto the pieces of astrology, but I have a love affair with the zodiac. Like, I love
mhm.
the zodiac. I have a Virgo South Node, a Virgo MC. So, like, I just love that geometry. And the
Yeah.
geometry of the zodiac is even more perfect than the geometry of the planets. You know, it's just a circle divided into perfect parts. And um, so, yeah, astrology as a division of consciousness system. And then the I Ching is similar, right? The 64 hexagrams of the I Ching. Um, Human design kind of pulls from, or to me, it feels like more is like inspired by the Tree of Life and the Kabbalah system. And so, and then there's also like other stuff that came through Ra's vision, this guy who downloaded or channeled human design back in 1987, is like biology and what's it called? Physics, but the quantum physics. Is that what it's called? I'm not a
Mhm,
scientist. And so yeah, it's like he got all this information and there's like YouTube videos of him talking about his experience, but he doesn't use the word channel. He says that he was like essentially visited by a voice for 8 days that told him to grab this book, grab this book. I actually have a sticky note um of the 3 books because I never remember. It was the Bhagavad Gita, a standard biology book, and something else that my handwriting, I can't read my handwriting right now, but the voice told him to like get all these systems and it showed books and information, and it showed him how to put all these different ancient systems together to create what is human design. So it in some ways it is this synthesis of all these different systems that they're like juxtaposed and layered on top of each other in a way that had never been done before, and that shows us things that none of those systems on their own can. More practically speaking, what is human design? It kind of comes down to like looking at the body graph, which is this image of a human form with 9 centers. So, one of the systems it pulls from that I didn't mention is the Hindu Brahman chakra system,
mhm,
right? So, in human design, we call them the energy centers. And there's 9 instead of 7, which we could say a lot about that, but I'll skip it for the moment. And it's basically a map of how energy, this is what the body graph is. It's a map of how energy, awareness, willpower, resonance, um, and yeah, I think I named all the things, how they move through the human body. And so the blank body graph is like a template, and then your body graph shows which places that energy, awareness, willpower, resonance exist for you and how. And then it shows everything else that's not like you or your definition is how you take in the world outside of you, how you take in other people's energy. So it's a very clear and distinct mechanical map of how your body, your form works, on an energetic level, an awareness level, a willpower level. And this what most people have heard of when they know just the basics of human design are aura type, right? So generator and man gen are the most common aura type, then projectors, then manifestors, then reflectors. And essentially what we're dealing with when we're dealing with type is these really practical tools that synthesize all the really complex information underneath them that you can get when you learn to actually read the body graph. When we work with type, each type comes with a strategy. Each type comes with what we call a signature and a not self theme. And just these are the simple like steps that you were talking about that I offered you to lean into when we first talked about your design. Those simple tools are just like so practical, but so success. They're so simple, but they're so practical and like good at, effective at helping you attune to your own frequency as it's mapped out in the body graph without you needing to understand the body graph.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see, I said a lot more than trying to define human design. Let me try to do it real quick. Human design is, it's similar to astrology in that it is a map of your frequency that we get from looking at the planetary configuration at the moment of your birth. But instead of being mapped out on a 2D depiction of sky, like the natal chart is, it draws from other systems to help us see a really clear, concentrated, practical map of how that planetary configuration speaks to your form and your consciousness as an individual vessel. And another thing that's distinct about it is that it's taking your birth data, so the moment of your birth, but it's also taking a planetary configuration from 88 days before you were born. And it's the combination of those two configurations that creates your design. So that's another thing to consider when we're kind of looking at how our designs tell a different story than our natal charts, because the natal chart is only what in human design we refer to as the personality or the conscious. And human design takes this other entirely different planetary configuration, puts it with your conscious design, which is what we as astrologers know as our natal chart, and shows us how they work together. It's a binary system, right? Like your design, your unconscious design, and your personality design, your self and your not self. There's a lot of binary in human design, but it's the fusion of essentially your unconscious or your form or your design and your conscious or your personality or your mind. So it also just gives more information than we see in a natal chart alone.
Bravo. That is a lot to convey so
Yeah,
succinctly.
thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for giving me the space to actually do it,
Like a
because
small
I
request.
don't I don't like to, like, it's really hard to define in a sentence or two. So
It
it's nice.
is.
It's
It
nice when
is.
I'm allowed to say a little more.
Yeah, and it's just so helpful um at helping us like get out of our heads and just like, is it an affinity for me to XYZ or is this not? Is this thing that I'm supposed to do from my energy awareness showing up? It's not. Okay, there's nothing I need to do. It just helps us get out of our heads and listen to our bodies so much. And but what the thing of human design that we're talking about today, or I wanted to focus on today, is the profile. And so before we can talk about the fifth line, which is part of profile rhetoric or profile vocabulary, how do you like when you think about teaching profile or talking about profile, how do you describe that? Because I
Yeah,
feel like it itself is like its own
it
world.
is its own thing. You're right. It's totally its own thing. Like almost everything I said up to this point about human design is like 80% of it's irrelevant to profile. um okay, so here's where I'll start, like knowing that a lot of your listeners are astrology proficient, right?
Yes.
So what human design actually comes from is, or what the body graph comes from is from something we call the Rave Mandala, which is the zodiac. It's the tropical zodiac juxtaposed on the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching. And in human design, those 64 hexagrams are translated to the 64 gates. And this is like extra info, but I just know for me as an astrologer, in order to like to even entertain what these numbers in the profile that we're about to talk about, like Britain being a 3-5, me being a 5-2 are, for me as an astrologer, it was like very helpful to have at least some idea of where it comes from. So in human design in the Rave Mandala, we take the 360 degrees of the tropical zodiac and we juxtapose it on these 64 different divisions, which we call gates, and they come from the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching. So it's kind of like, dividing the zodiac into decans instead of signs, except it's 64 gates. And each of those 64 gates is then divided into 6 lines. So where your profile comes from is your sun. Like you can look at your natal chart sun. For example, mine is at 8 degrees Aries. And where that lands in the Rave Mandala is in gate 17. And specifically where my sun is in the 5th line of gate 17. So there's the 64 gates that are a subdivision of the zodiac, and then each gate has a further subdivision of 6 lines. So I was born with the sun at 17.5, or the 5th line of gate 17, so near the end of gate 17, right? Britain was born with the sun, her 13 degrees Pisces sun on the Rave Mandala, that's gate 63 and line 3 of it. So that's where the first number in your profile comes from. The second number in your profile comes from your sun of that other configuration, 88 days before you were born. So we each have a conscious profile line, and we each have an unconscious profile line. So there's a nice, I know I haven't said what profile is yet. I'll get there. But, what Britain is trying to get me to talk about eventually is the 5th line, which is what we share. So just throwing it out there, planting a little seed that for me, the 5th line is conscious. For you, the 5th line is unconscious, right? So already there's some differentiation between how we operate with the 5th line. Now, what is the 5th line? What are the lines? They're actually just these subdivisions of the zodiac, right? But how do we translate that in human design? Our profile as a whole, these two numbers that go together, they're usually defined in human design as they're like your character role that you play. So when we're dealing with your body graph, the centers and the gates and the channels and your type, which comes from that, your aura type, we're dealing with like physical energy, like how your form energetically moves through the world and how it plugs into other people and how conditioning plugs into your form. But when we're dealing with profile, we're talking about something a little more like, I want to say like intellectual, but I don't know if that's the right word. Conceptual. It's not as in the body. It is mechanical, but it's like a more subtle layer of your energetic mechanics. But it's like the character who plays a role with your form. So it's like this costume on top of your body graph, or this costume on top of your aura type. Is that a good stopping point?
Yeah.
I can keep going.
I haven't thought of it that way. I really like it. Yeah, because each of the lines has like an archetype attached to it.
And I think it probably makes sense to like briefly go through them, right? So we
Yeah,
can
let's do that.
place the
And
5th line in context.
yeah, go for it.
Okay. So there's the 6 lines, right? For me, the quickest, easiest way to start to understand them is to understand them in halves. So 1, 2, and 3 is what we call the lower trigram or the personal trigram. 4, 5, and 6 are what we call the upper trigram or the transpersonal trigram. Most profiles have one of each number. There's 6 profile lines. There's only 12 potential combinations of the two numbers. And I was very curious about the reason for that, but it's a little complex. So study human design. You can study it with me if you want the explanation for that. We'll probably talk about it in Heretic Haven. But there's only 12 potential profiles. And so all of us have 2 of these archetypes represented. 1, 2, and 3, the reason they're called the personal profile numbers or the personal trigram is because those are the characters or the parts of the human experience that are invested in a personal process. And when you get to 4, 5, and 6, in order to play out that archetype, there's an investment in something relational or something transpersonal. And just like the zodiac is this, process that we move through, right? Like Aries builds on Pisces, Taurus builds on Aries. It's a spiral, not a circle, right? Same thing with the profile lines. Like the process of the second line is based on the process of the first line, which is based on the process of the 6th line that comes before it. So none of it's not hierarchical is essentially what I'm trying to say. I kind of like to think about it as a learning process. Like in 1, 2, and 3, you're learning. You're in the process of learning something for yourself. And when you get to 4, 5, and 6, there's this more kind of like expressive process. There's something about what you learned, what you integrated, that you're now ready to share. That's the transpersonal trigram. So the word that goes with it is the investigator. And this is the part of the process where you're just like rabbit holing, taking in information. It's the foundation of the whole trigram. So you're just trying to get all the information to build a foundation. So people who are investigators, who have a 1 in their profile, are very oriented towards coming to a solid foundation. They're very oriented towards security, for their own personal reasons, own personal process. 2 is called the hermit. Sometimes people will use the word the natural for the 2 as well, which as a second line myself, the natural resonated with me before the hermit did. This is the part of the process where you're done like reading the book, and now you're kind of in the process of marinating in it, practicing it, becoming natural at it. One of the metaphors I'll use for 1 to 2 sometimes is like, if you're learning guitar, the first line part of the process is when you're like looking up the tab shape, like how to hold your finger. And the second line is when you're like actually practicing moving between chords, and you're actually beginning to find some kind of like fluidity with it. The reason it's called the hermit is because people with second lines, we tend to need to be alone in our own space, in our own energy, to tap into our natural gifts. So it's not that we don't like learning in the first line way. It's just that for us, for hermits, it's not about getting all the information. It's about accessing the information that we have in an intuitive way that's unique to us, that is our natural gift. And we actually need a bit of protection. We need to hermit out a little bit in order to access that natural gift. So that's why we're the hermit. 3, Britain's a 3. 3's the edge of the lower trigram, right? So this is like where you take what you've learned and practiced in the first and second lines, and you like really find out how it works and whether it works. So 3's archetype is the martyr. 3's are here to like 1s and 2s are kind of sensitive. We're like earlier in the learning process. 3's are not sensitive, at least not in the way 1s and 2s are. There's like a real resilience to a 3. 3's are the people who go out and try the thing to actually find out if it works. So they're, the people who our ancestors, the 3's would have been the people trying the different plants to see what's poisonous and what's not, right? The 3's are here to like really find out through a trial and error process. So it can be a little messy, but at the same time, when a third line knows something, they have a solidity of knowledge that is not available to 1s and 2s, because 1s and 2s are either like heads in the books or like heads in their own weird process. 3's are like, I tried it out and I can tell you what really works. You get to 4, you're now at the foundation of the transpersonal trigram. So there's a resonance between 4 and 1. They're both foundational in a way. 4th lines are called the opportunists, and they're looking for opportunities to plug into different people to share what they have learned through their 1, 2, 3 process. So when you get to the 4th line, you know enough now that you're ready to spread the information and share it, and you're looking for opportunities to influence, to be influenced. 4th lines, I always get this image of just like this horizontal network, or like the game of telephone. 4th lines are just like trying to spread the information. And it's not that they can't know the way a 1, 2, or 3 can. It's just that their character is more interested in spreading the information horizontally than they are in learning more. And these are all kind of generalizations, right? Hopefully astrologers can understand the need for generalizations when you're learning. Then you get to 5. 5 has a harmonic to 2, right? And it's kind of like in the 1 you learn, in the 2 you practice. In the 4, you learn how to influence on the transpersonal realm. In the 5, you kind of master that, right? So 4th lines are here to share their messages with people they know, with people in their network. 5th lines, the archetype is the heretic, are here to universalize something. I kind of think as a 5th line, it's like we get bored with just we get bored with like having to change the way we say the message to all these different people. We get so good at delivering the message that we're just like, I'm going to say it this one way. It's going to have a lot of truth and potency in it, and the message is going to get far and wide. So heretics are like, we're universalizers. We're very well practiced, right? There's the harmonic to the 2 at influencing and getting a message across transpersonally. And so 5th lines are here to figure out the universal way to say something or express something so that it can reach beyond just the network, the horizontal network, and far and wide to whoever can hear it. Also sometimes known as the messenger. And then the sixth line, harmonic to 3, right? The 3 is like, let me just go fucking try it and do it and get my hands dirty. The sixth line is the transpersonal version of that. Their archetype is the role model. And I often like to think about the 5 to the 6 as like the fifth lines speak the message. We say the message, the sixth lines embody it. There's a lot of association and correlation to embodiment when you're talking about the sixth line or the sixth color or the sixth tone if you get deeper into human design. It's a lot about like physical embodiment. So six lines, role models, they're not necessarily here to like shout out the heretical message or universalization like a fifth line is. They're here through the lived experience, the long story arc of their life to embody truth as they uniquely and authentically can. And that's why they're the role model.
Well, again. Yeah, so like I like to think about the simplified terms for myself. It just feels deeply true that the third line part of me is kind of the part I'm willing to get bruised to find out. Like I'm willing to like jump out of the car just to know what happens.
And because that's the conscious one for you, you're more consciously driven to your own personal process of learning through trying, regardless of the bruises. That's what your personality, you're consciously driven to do. But you have this like less conscious thing that your body and your energy is always bringing into your life, which is not only am I going to go, like you have what we call a transpersonal, or sorry, a personal profile because the personal number is conscious for you. Even though you do have a transpersonal line, your conscious intent is not actually necessarily to teach. That just happens through you unconsciously, through your energy, through your aura. So with 3/5s, I think, and I know a lot of 3/5s, you all are just like, out here, resilient, brave, doing your own thing, and it just happens to be extremely influential, and you just happen to like make your mistakes publicly, and you just happen to have a way about you that you're able to universalize even though you weren't driven to universalize, you were just driven to figure it out for your fucking self, you know? But somehow you always end up being able to and attracting people who want to learn from your own personal third line process. You're just a natural universalizer, but that's at the why for you, right? Versus for me as a 5/2 and 5/1s, which is an even more common fifth line profile. So probably a lot of the fifth lines listening to this are either 5/1s or 3/5s because those are the two more common ones. For those of us with a 5 in the conscious number, we really identify as these teachers, as these heretics. Like we're driven consciously to find the universalization and share it, but we have to kind of learn to trust either our first line body or our second line body to guide how we do that, because it's really easy for us to get caught up in I have to teach, I have to find the message, and then disregard the need for security or the need for hermiting that lives underneath that. Whereas for you as a 3/5, you're like, you might be like, why are people even paying attention to me? Like I'm just doing my own thing. And you might feel like a disregard. There might be a part of your mind that feels this like disregard for actually owning the skill set that you have as a universalizer, as a messenger, as a heretic, and the need for you to be able to express that part of yourself.
Yeah. So are those the three
The,
for fifth lines?
and
There's
2/5.
three
There's
and
4.
2/5.
Mhm.
So yeah, so it's 2/5. Again, it's that more like I didn't even realize that this thing I was like practicing in my own little space, my hermit space. Somehow everyone likes this.
Yeah. When you have a 2 in your profile, and you know there's other non fifth line profiles that have 2s as well. There's 2/4s and 6/2s. But when you have a 2 in your profile, there is a real aloofness to it. Like there's a phrase that goes along with the 2 of needing to be called, needing your gifts to be like called out. We need 2s need other people to tell us what we're good at because it's so natural to us and it's personal, right? So just like you with the 3, I'm not developing my natural gifts necessarily for anyone. It's just what I do. And the 2 often like kind of can't see themselves. There's an element of projection with the 2 and the 5. So yeah, for 2s, there's like a real aloofness. Like we need people to tell us what we're good at because we don't know. But those natural gifts are such a huge part of what we're here to offer as second lines.
Yeah. So let's get deeper into the fifth line experiences. I like this fifth line experience phrasing that you're calling in, you and Allison, who are putting together Heretic Haven, which we will get deeper into here. I looked up the etymology of heretic. It's from the Greek root meaning able to choose.
Ooh.
And I thought this was very interesting because then it was applied to heretics, as in like they just chose, like, I don't have to believe this dogma. We're like, well, no, we're choosing to look at it this way, or I'm choosing not to partake in this paradigm and go with this other paradigm, which I found pretty fascinating.
Yeah, it is interesting. Like I think a lot about how sometimes my own understanding of the mechanics of the fifth line does feel, I don't know if it feels like separate from, but it feels like bigger than just the archetype of the heretic. So it's
Mm-hmm.
interesting sometimes to think about Ra or the voice having chosen that word, you know? Um, but for me, like the way that I think about that word and how it fits into this like bigger frequency concept and frequency that I have discovered about what the fifth line experience is like the messenger part, right? Like a heretic is someone who has an opinion that might be kind of at odds with the consensus reality, and they have a message to deliver according to that opinion. And sometimes that message, it hits people in a way that it kind of like rattles them in an inspiring way. It speaks to something that someone was feeling that they didn't feel they could quite name or articulate themselves. And that's part of our gift is the messenger, the universalizer. Is like there's this feeling of almost like anonymity that can show up beside the fifth line, or at least I've come to kind of think that there's something about anonymity that feels like safe and protects me as a fifth line. Because when people tap into that message, that heretical message, this is where the projection piece comes in. There's this part of the reason why people can hear it, why so many people far and wide can resonate with and hear the message of the fifth line. And like for listeners of your podcast, like this is part of why they're drawn to you, not
Mm-hmm.
amongst many other things about your frequency that they clearly resonate with, but like listening to a fifth line, it makes it very easy to resonance can be very easy listening to a fifth line because we speak things in this universalized way that makes it so people hear whatever they need to hear in order to grab the message that's for them. And so there can be that feeling of like just being really inspired by the fifth line, but really what it is it's a mirror to something that you experience yourself, to something that you know yourself, that because this person's the heretic, because this person's the messenger, the universalizer, they're able to name it in a way. Remember, the 5 is harmonic to the 2, so there's a naturalness to it. We just have this natural ability to speak the message, and it hits so many people because people receive it differently. I often get the image of like a disco ball for the fifth line because it's like we have so many different like mirrors that we can present, where these different like fragmented pieces of human or character based on who we're reflecting back. And that's part of our power, is that, at least part of our practicality, is that anybody can resonate with our message because we find a way to deliver it with such universalization that anyone can find what they need in the message. But that works both ways because we are often delivering messages that are kind of at odds with what the homogenized collective mind has accepted for the time being. It can also be really activating for people. And so if it's not a feeling of like being inspired by something you're receiving through this universalization being reflected back at you, oftentimes the other end of that spectrum is it's like hitting something that your ego is not ready to look at yet. And so that's where, I mean, projection happens on both ends, right? I tend to focus on the negative projection, but projection happens on both ends. Like, another archetype for the heretic is the general or the savior or the problem solver. So people just as easily will like pedestalize the heretic, pedestalize the fifth line, because they have this like really unique and empowering experience being reflected back from the fifth line, or receiving a message from the fifth line that shows them something about themselves, that shows them something about truth. and then they project that like inspiration, that truth, um that saviorness onto the fifth line. They're like, oh, they're the guru complex kind of thing, right?
Mhm.
And then because as fifth lines, we can kind of like fit the mold of whatever people need in order to be able to learn from us, not consciously from our own doing a lot of the time. It's just like energetically what happens. We tend to then take on a lot in regards to wanting to meet everybody's expectations, wanting to be able to perform as this savior, this guru, this general, this problem solver, in all these different ways that other people need from us. And so a really painful dynamic that a lot of fifth lines experience is that we get pedestalized, but then we get thrown off the pedestal, because when people pedestalize you, when they have these quote positive projections of you, they have these expectations of you that, one, we never agreed to, two, we could not possibly meet because the expectations come from that person's projection, right? And three, just dehumanize us. Like there's dehumanization that happens on both the pedestalization end and the villain end. But it's like the higher someone has placed you on their pedestal, when you don't meet their expectation, the more painful their experience is going to be. And then they're going to project that experience onto you. And now you become the villain. And I think one thing important to name too is like, everyone lives in the projection field. All of us project and all of us receive projection. It's not like this dynamic that I'm explaining. Everyone can resonate with it. And especially like we just had a South Node Libra eclipse. We've got this next eclipse right on Chiron and Aries. Like projection is in the air right now. And my understanding is that the collective is really working through a lot of like detangling of codependency that's built on a habit of projection. Um, that's kind of one of the ways I think about the Chiron and Aries transit. So like an almost decade long transit that we're in. So this, like you said at the top of our conversation, learning about projection is so helpful and important for everyone, regardless of your profile, regardless of your human design. There's just something specific about the way that fifth lines carry, we're like projection magnets. So we really move through the projection field, like drawing projections towards us. And in order for us to play our role as heretics, as these universalizers, these messengers, projection is actually a tool that we need, because the reason so many people can hear our message, can learn from us, is because they're able to project onto us. So there's this really kind of delicate dynamic that I've had to move through many like processes around grievance, being angry, acknowledging where I've been a victim when it comes to projection, but then slowly and also over and over again coming to terms with like, I love being a fifth line and this is who I am and I need the projection field. The projection field is like a spell that is cast wherever I go, wherever I speak, that allows me to play my role as a heretic. So projection is everywhere. Everyone does it. Everyone experiences it. But the extent to which people with fifth lines in their profile experience it is just honestly unfathomable, I've come to see, for people who don't have that lived experience.
Yeah, whoa. Thank you. Yeah, I like in the astrological chart, I have always associated my relationship to projection with being a very Piscean 12th house person with those planets square Neptune and Jupiter. Uh, and so in Unshaming Pisces, I had one of my posts was like, the fact that you presumed whatever about me is not my fault. And now you're disappointed. This
Exactly.
thing is so healing for my younger selves, who were just like hustling so hard to manage expectation and just like the overwhelm of how in this world am I going to like keep everyone happy with whatever they think I am? Like letting myself just
Exhausting.
completely let go of this game.
Yeah. And one of the things that's been like really helpful for me that I'm excited to incorporate pretty heavily into Heretic Haven is taking this like awareness that we have around projection and this ability to kind of look back and see how it's affected us to carry this projection field around us our whole lives, but then coming at it from a practical place using these basic tools of human design that we know, like strategy and authority and the not self hierarchy, right? Because as I'm hearing you talk about this, my attention is immediately drawn to the two centers you have undefined, which are your head and your ego. And so, where do those narratives about other people's projections onto you and other people's expectations of you, where do they live in your form, in your mind, in your not self? They live in your undefined head and your undefined ego. So
Mhm.
for you, you get thwarted, you lose sight of your own self-image and the way that your own, in your case, I would say like sacral and solar plexus give you a sense of self, right? That's your strategy is sacral based and your authority is in the solar plexus. So attuning to those two centers and what information they have for you is all that matters for you, but you will lose sight of that when you get lost in the amplification of your undefined head and your undefined ego. So for you, those projections live in just this constant mental pressure, undefined head that's like thinking you have to answer all these questions and figure out all these things, answer other people's questions that you don't even care about. And then the undefined ego, which is like this existential pain of feeling that you have to prove your worth, that you have
Mhm.
to vindicate your existence, right? And I have a defined ego. So it's like my experience is it has a different shape and texture to yours. For me, those projections live in my three undefined centers, which are head, ajna, and sacral. So if anybody knows the themes for those, right, the head I mentioned, because we both have, is like just the constant mental pressure, overthinking, over analyzing, feeling like you have to deal with other people's mental pressures and mental concerns, answer their questions. The ajna is similar to that. For me, it's just like it has a similar feeling to the ego where it feels like it needs to prove, but for me the ajna is very much about like the binary thinking of good, bad, right, wrong. So I get really stuck in my undefined ajna when projections come up and like when I get villainized, thinking that like I have to figure out and I have to prove that I wasn't morally wrong, right? Because like kind of
Mhm.
ethical, moral ways of thinking live in the ajna. You have a defined ajna, so you can kind of take the projections and filter them through the way that you think about things. And the head and the ego are going to try to thwart you, but you have this fixicity in your mental process that kind of can operate as a shield, whereas I don't. So I'm like, oh, you think I'm bad? Oh, you think this was unjust? Like, oh, you think this was problematic? And suddenly, like I can't stop listening to those voices and worrying that like that's true, right? And then for me, also the undefined sacral, which the not self of that is not knowing when enough is enough. So just like overperforming, over giving, trying to be available when I'm not, because I'm a manifester and I'm not available for most things, if I'm being honest with myself. But because other people project onto me that I can do this, can do that, should do this, should do that, for most of my life, I was running around trying to meet those expectations, like living as this super powered MG when I really had about 10% of the energy resources that I and a lot of people around me thought I should have.
Mm. And then, so then your Saturn return was like, no.
Sit down, bitch. Yeah.
I'm curious if you see, like, do you have any natal chart
Oh, yeah, yeah.
that speak to projection field and
Yeah.
line experience?
Yeah. So for me personally, a lot of what I see is I'm a Sag rising, so I'm ruled by Jupiter, and I have Jupiter in Gemini in the seventh, and it's pretty tightly square my nodes. And I have a South node in Virgo in the 10th. So for me, like I just really see that Jupiter from evolutionary astrology as like my skipped step, right? Like really triggering through a T square this requirement that I integrate across my 10th house, 4th house axis, since that's where my nodes are. And the South node in Virgo in the 10th specifically being like a potential to become really fixated on and obsessed with my reputation and public image in a very perfectionist type of way. And the North node in Pisces, like really calling me to just like trust myself and trust in my inherent goodness, right? And then
Mhm.
Jupiter in the seventh being like, it's through my relationships and through how other people perceive me and this mirroring projection effect that I'm forced to reconcile with that. So I do see in a lot of fifth lines like 10-7 emphasis, oftentimes including like a T square or a square. I also see it's interesting that you bring up the 12th and Pisces, because that's not one that I have thought about much before you mentioned it, but I can see it. I also tend to associate eighth house stuff with projection as well, because one of the ways that I like to think about, and I have Chiron in the eighth, you have Uranus in the eighth. Um, One of the ways I think about the second house, eighth house axis is, in addition to like the traditional delineations of money and value and stuff like that, I often also see the second house as like boundaries in a
Mm.
way, because it's what you have as an individual. And then the eighth house, I sometimes will see as a place where enmeshment lives. And, you know, the other side of enmeshment is like the deep, intimate, raw connection and vulnerability that we're able to have when we merge with another soul or when we merge with another realm. Right. But 2-8 can also just be this like binary experience of this is me, this is mine, this is my stuff, physically and energetically. And then the eighth house is like what happens when our stuff combines and projection. So does that make sense? Like projection to
Yeah,
me can really live in the eighth
totally.
house because it's not what's mine, it's what's ours.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So it's really fascinating that you and your co-facilitator, Allison, what's her last name?
Allison Forseth.
Yes. Um, had this idea to create a haven for heretics. Because I feel like over the last year in conversations with mostly 3/5s, but I also have 5/1s in my life too, where we have kind of vented basically with one another and shared story with one another to talk about like this weird experience of being fifth line. And also, as you said before, like not wishing it away. Like I like actually being so happy to be fifth lines, but also like, you can understand this. Let's talk about
Mm-hmm.
it. I'm curious how you came up with this idea and just tell us about it.
Yeah. Well, Allison and I met in person at an event that I organized in the fall of 2022, I think, called In Aura. And it was just this little intimate place for human design experimenters to come together and talk about what we know and experiment with what we know actually in aura together. Because a lot of times, you know, human design is astrology is a lot more intellectual. Human design is very somatic, very like energetic in the body, in your aura. And so you're experiencing it whether the people around you are thinking about it through human design or not, but it can be really, it can really accelerate your awareness of the energetics to be able to experience aura stuff happening in real time and talk about it with other people who also speak that language. So that's what in aura was. We'll probably do it again one day.
Good idea.
It was really fun. But uh Allison and I we just had like a weird, like mystical experience together, which there's a quality of the fifth line that's kind of like mysterious and seductive and foggy and mystical because the projection field fogs up reality. So a lot of times when you like first meet a fifth line, they have this mysterious kind of seductive presence to them. You're like, what is that? I don't quite know, right? And then you fill in the gaps with your assumptions and projections. So one of my really good friends, actually, 3/5 emotional manifester, Kat Fitzgerald. I feel like you probably been
Mm.
adjacent to her online. She described to me once that she always thinks of fifth lines as like color by number pages, where as she's getting to know a fifth line, and even when she thinks she knows them really well, like I said, her and I are really close and we're both fifth lines, there just is this, you need to remember that you're slowly filling out this color by number page and you're only going to get to fill out to color in one section every now and then, and so you always have to like stay open to that you don't know everything about this fifth line, and you might never, because you're never going to really get to escape the experience of seeing them through the projection field. Anyways, Allison and I had this kind of mysterious, like, I describe it as like we watched each other from across the room. We didn't talk to each other the first couple days we were there, And then when we got home, we just, Allison's a projector, 5/1 emotional projector. When we got home, we just had this feeling that we like were meant to be in touch. And so we would voice note every now and then. And we always would like, we would share with each other our like fears around projection. Like we would, when we were letting each other, we were recognizing each other and complimenting each other and getting to know each other and letting each other know, you know, what we were enjoying about getting to know each other. There would always be this caveat of like, no, not guruifying you though, like no projection though, or like I'm at least aware that I'm projecting onto you, you know, and this like pattern of like fear was really present, but it didn't feel scary between us because we were naming it and because we could
Mhm.
see in each other that not only do we know about the fifth line, but we've also really been through fifth line shit enough to be careful and uh to be able to be mindful of like where projections might be popping up. And so slowly we just like developed a really lovely um rapport of like safety between one another. And then before we met and also after we met, we both had also been through like pretty traumatic experiences of being what we call fifth line, so like burned at the stake. Both of us have had like really ridiculous experiences online where people have like tried to cancel us or like raise public campaigns against us for things that are just like ridiculous. And I know you've experienced this too. um and also like personal, I've had really painful personal experiences with where really close friends or family members have like knocked me really hard off a pedestal, and like that stuff has honestly been more heartbreaking for me personally. But the internet public stuff is really activating when it happens too, when you feel like your entire reputation or your livelihood is at risk because someone who doesn't even know you has decided that you're problematic, you know, has these like absurd projections onto you. So we benefited a lot in our relationship just from like sharing with each other when those things were happening. And Allison's not the only fifth line that I've been lucky enough to like have as a resource to go through these things. But for me, when I'm in the thick of those projection experiences and my nervous system is activated and my undefined centers are screaming at me all the reasons why this person is right and I am bad.
Yeah.
I have a couple friends who aren't fifth lines who have been extremely supportive for me in those moments and who can see it or see an angle of it that's useful. But for the most part, where I find like immediate support and solace is describing what's happening to another fifth line because they can see the absurdity of it so clearly. And from their lived experience, can remind you that this is what happens and it has nothing to do with you, what you said, who you are, um, the truth. That it's everything to do with this distortion that this person is clinging to about you. And so, yeah, we just like found so much support in one another through that. And we've done one other offering together with our reflector friend Amanda called Not Self Bestie. And we just love working together. And we both kind of had been envisioning a fifth line offering separately for a while. And then Allison came to me with Heretic Haven by name probably like a year ago. And I know Allison's been dreaming of it for much longer. And her being a projector, me being a manifester, it was a lot of just like waiting because I was like, yes, I want to do that. I don't know when I'll move on it. And then eventually, I think it was this past February or January, the energy came through and we've just been like working on it really diligently. But it's basically like, I mean, it's what it sounds like, right? Heretic Haven. It's a space for us to play in and acknowledge the many layers and many nuances of this experience because it's really easy to get stuck in grief and victimization about it. And I also think that we have to, right? Like you, me, and Allison are all emotionally defined beings. So that emotional process, that slow churning through the emotional wave is our authority. And so as emotionals, we know that we can't just ignore the grief. You know, we can't just ignore the parts of this experience of feeling unseen and feeling so deeply misunderstood sometimes by the people closest to us. um it's hard, you know, we have to move through that, but at the same time it can be really easy to stop wanting to put yourself out there when you realize that projection is such an inevitable experience for you. And I'm 4 years in now, and I would say it was probably 2.5 years into my experiment that I was like had processed the grief of it enough that I was ready to like kind of reemerge and come to new levels of acceptance and empowerment and responsibility around my role as a heretic. And so the Haven is like, there's going to be it's an immersive experience. It's a mix of like, there's going to be some teaching. Allison and I are both like teachers by trade. Um, but there's also going to be a lot of space for processing in large group and small group. And ultimately, we're kind of like moving through this process where you'll understand this, your listeners might not, where we're following this path through the awareness centers. So month 1 is splenic, month 2 is ajna, month 3 is solar plexus. And people don't need to know this. This is just like art. People don't need to understand the awareness centers to participate. This is just our inspiration. So for the first month, we're going to be really dealing with first and second principle. So building a foundation of understanding. The second month, we're going to be in ajna, so principles 3 and 4. So more about trial and error, experimentation, connection, finding confidants within one another, dealing with about how the fifth line shows up in relationship, kind of fourth line exchange stuff. And then the third month, we're going to be dealing in solar plexus awareness. So practical solutions, which really is like strategy and authority, like utilizing this practical system to help us navigate the projection field with more ease. Embodiment, embodying the heretic. 5 is the heretic itself, and 6 is the role model. So really embodying this archetype that our souls have taken on in this lifetime. So it's going to be a really beautiful mix of the understanding the mechanics of it, validating the pain and the reality of the experience, because no one can validate the absurdity of the projections like another fifth line who's been through it, but also like moving through the emotional alchemy of processing it and receiving supportive practical tools to help you see that your body already has all the resources that it needs to navigate the complexity of the projection field. And again, that is largely through these basics of human design, like strategy and authority.
Mm. I'm so excited. As you know, I've already signed up. Do you feel that, like, what level, if any, of familiarity with human design does someone want to have if they're thinking about joining?
Yeah. So the message that we've put out is like that Heretic Haven is for people who are already experimenting with human design.
Mhm.
That can mean a lot of things, right? Like some people see Instagram posts about their type and are slowly maybe integrating aspects of that. If it feels true to you that you have some kind of foundational level of understanding and you're have been aware of it and working with it for any amount of time, then Heretic Haven could be for you. Um, but I would honestly say it's hard for me to answer those types of questions lately because I'm just like, listen to your body, because that's what human design teaches us, right? Like if you're a generator and you're feeling lit up by this and there's a part of your body that's going yes, then this is for you, right? If
Mhm.
you're like 50% of the world who has emotional authority, you're not going to know in this moment. You're going to need to sit with it for a few days and see if it keeps returning to you as something you feel drawn to, right? If you have splenic authority, you're just going to get an intuitive hit at some point that's for you. So I will say, like, because it's going to be such a spiralic process and because we're dealing so specifically with one aspect of human design, I don't necessarily think that having like a super strong foundation in the basics of design is necessary, but just know that we're gearing it towards that there's some level of understanding of the basics already. The basics are aura type, strategy, and authority, but we're also teachers, and we're going to share our own resources from past things too. So I could see there being a person or two for whom like this container is just the right initiation into human design for them.
Mm.
They would just have to come into it with the awareness that like we're not teaching you the basics of human design. We're zooming in on one specific aspect of it, but we'll be there to support filling in the blanks if there are any for you.
Yeah. Well, let me think. Is there anything else you would want anyone to know about it? Let's see, dates.
Yeah, let me talk just like a little bit about the structure. So I
Yeah.
talked kind of about the vision and inspiration of the 3 months moving through this process. Each of those months has what we're calling a heretic call and 2 haven calls. Plus, we're going to have a private community that we're going to experiment with hosting on Instagram. It's because we think it'll be the easiest way to implement everything we want to. So the Heretic calls are more like transmissions. Those are happening on Wednesday evenings, afternoons, American time zones. And they're one Wednesday a month, and live attendance is not required for that because it's basically going to be me talking and showing some slides and kind of just like setting the tone for what themes we're exploring that month and doing a bit of teaching. And Allison will be there, so there'll be some conversation involved. And people can come live, but we're kind of thinking about them as like a broadcast, like a live broadcast, and the recordings will be just as useful. And then 2 Fridays of the month, every other Friday after the Heretic call, we'll have these Haven calls, which happen either late morning or early afternoon, depending on your American time zone. It's like evening in Europe and middle of the night for Australians. Sorry, Australians. We're having our Haven calls, which one a month will be full group, and Allison will facilitate a group discussion based on the themes that we're diving into that month, and the other one will be small group. So I'm really excited for those because we'll get to divide, and we're going to divide in different ways. Like there will be an aura type one, so all the fifth line projectors get together, generators, manifestors, probably MGs, because I think we have enough generators and MGs now to split you guys up, reflectors, and then we'll have another one by profile where you'll meet with all the 3/5s and just get to like hear each other's experiences with that specific version of the fifth line frequency. And then there's one more, which we're going to wait to see how we're inspired to do that. So yeah, there's these 3 calls per month. 2, the live attendance is more important and more engaging. The other one, you can watch the recording. And then we're going to have an IG, private IG, where we don't have like a super perfect, clear, filled in vision of how we're going to use it, but we're going to be on it a lot. We'll do like lives. We'll connect everybody there. We'll post extra content and extra prompts for reflection and questions and answers that we'll share different heretics inside the havens experiences with each other. So that'll be like the glue, the negative space where we stay connected and engage in between these calls.
I love it. I was just thinking in my head that I think one of the things that is so appealing for me is that as a fifth line human, there's something about the podium or the microphone that's very comfortable for me, but like community isn't always as comfortable if I'm
Yep.
you're nodding your head.
You're also not the first person who's signed up who has voiced like reservations specifically around that aspect of it.
But it's like, well, but if I'm with other fifth lines, like what's better? Because we're all going to be watching
We're
this
all gonna
very
be
particular
projecting
thing.
onto each other. Like we were joking the other day about using that Spider-Man meme, the Spider-Men meme, where there's the 3 Spider-Men pointing at each other, that's what it's going to be like inside the Haven. But honestly, that's a part of the value of it. Like for me, observing how I experience other fifth lines and like looking back and going, what was my first impression of them? How do I tend to think of them? What assumptions have I made about them? That has been so useful for me to have a better understanding of how I'm perceived as a fifth line.
Yes. Oh,
And
wow.
I also think one of the other things that's going to be really valuable about it is just getting to hear other people's experiences of projections, because when we're first starting to look at this shit, we do not know because we have so deeply accepted these projections about us as truths. And so for me, a lot of it is about like pattern recognition too. Like when I hear other people's versions of projections and get to hear them talk about what they've experienced and the kind of like energetic frequency of being projected onto, it makes it easier for my own awareness to recognize when a projection is happening, which makes it easier for me to divest from that version of reality that's sometimes getting screamed at me as it's happening. It doesn't mean it's not still like scary or activating or concerning in a way, but like I've become able to recognize what's happening and therefore divest my attention and energy and buy-in into those projections so much faster through just getting to better know what is happening when projections are happening and what types of projections do people receive. So I think that's going to be a really weird meta cool experiment for it to be like I get like not chills but some other kind of weird edgy feeling when I imagine this group of heretics coming together, because first of all, can you imagine the truth bombs that are going to drop, you know? But also just like Yeah, I've never experienced anything like that. I've had like a Zoom call with 4 fifth line friends before to complain, but I've never really gone in depth. And we're going to be experiencing each other through the internet, through each other's Instagram pages, through these squares on a computer. So it's going to be like a real life immersion into
Mhm.
projection. We're not exempt from doing the projection as fifth lines, right? So it's like we're going to be entering this like mystical, foggy haven where projection exists, but we're looking at it really clearly. We're looking at it with awareness, and we're working together to like navigate it with a lot of discernment and share
Mhm.
each other's expertise with these beautiful universalized messages that we're going to be able to influence each other
Totally.
with.
I love it. It's such a great experiment, and I'm so pumped to I'm proud of myself for honoring my yes, because, I had to kind of walk around it for a while, emotional authority here, but also just like, it's kind of scary.
Yeah. And
But
Allison and I have been through like Allison, we were on our friend Amanda's podcast recently, so people can listen to me and Allison talk about projection together for an
Mhm.
hour if they want to. The podcast is called Reflector Life, and we're one of the recent episodes. But like Allison just moved through spending almost a year offline because of an incident of like public projection that she experienced. I don't like to directly credit my divestment from social media with these multiple instances of villainization I've experienced, but they've certainly contributed to it. Like, I show up very differently online. I have a very different relationship with community than I did prior to my human design experiment, because I have Lilith in the 11th, and I'm in an 11th house year, 11th house Libra, and I have Venus, 11th ruler in Aries, and detriment in the 5th. So I have a complicated relationship with the 11th house. But I've really come to see how much people project onto community and how many expectations people have about community.
Mhm.
I did a whole heretical workshop a couple years ago called approaching community and relationship through the lens of the astrological houses, where I talk about how the 11th is not the 7th, the 11th is not the 3rd, the 11th is not the 8th, and people have ridiculous assumptions about what they should be able to expect from community, when really all that community is, like what really is the signification of the 11th house in astrology, that you have some kind of shared interest or vision. That's it. It doesn't mean you are accountable to each other. It's not the 7th house. It doesn't mean that you like have an intimate, vulnerable relationship with each other. It's not the 8th house. It doesn't even mean like the proximal level of accountability, like mutual aid that shows up in the 3rd house. So like the way that we sometimes, like as astrologers, expect more from the astrology community. When you hear stuff like that, that kind
Yes.
of stuff used to scare me, and now I'm just like, fuck that shit. Like, people are projecting, people are putting universalizations in places where they don't belong. That's another thing I've started to see, is how poorly non-fifth lines universalize sometimes. um, so anyways, all of that to say, I've been just like you, I've been very touchy the last few years about how I engage with community, and like the extent to which I want to be a part of community. Um, but I also have this feeling lately of like, I want to take community back, because community is still something that I value, and I have my own understanding of what it is and how I want to engage with it, and my own inner authority, my own self image, my own subjective reality has become so fortified through my human design experiment that I feel like now I can go out into the world and share my vision of what community is, and share my vision of what I want, this Heretic Haven experience to be, or any kind of community thing that I initiate. And I know I'm bracing myself for that some people are going to be disappointed by my offerings, by my work, by my expression, because that's an inherent part of carrying this fifth line archetype. You will disappoint people. It's inevitable, because people will expect things from you that you cannot provide. You will disappoint them. But now I'm like practiced enough in my self fortification. I trust enough in my own subjective reality and my own inner authority that I can handle it, So both Allison and I are like at this place where we're just now like really ready to put both feet back in from this place of empowerment, but the pain of the last 7 years of experimentation for Allison and 4 years for me is still right there. like we've just moved through this and we're ready to share. Which, let me say one more thing. Sorry, I moved to speak to this right now. You'd
Yeah.
asked about astrological markers. Another thing I see in my chart that feels very fifth liney to me is my natal disseminating moon, which
Mm,
also happens to be in Sagittarius in the first house, and Sag also feels kind of fifth liney. But
yes.
yeah, having a disseminating moon, right? Like the disseminating lunar phase is the one that happens right after the full moon. So it has this energy of like, this is what just happened. Let me share with you about it. Right. And so that's kind of where Allison and I both are with the pain of our experiences as fifth lines. We've like really moved through it in the last few years of our lives, and it still feels tender and we're still very sensitive to it, but we've integrated it. We're past the full moon stage of it, and we're ready to be
Yes.
like, let us tell you about it. Let us share that experience with you. And Allison's a third quarter moon, which, are you technically that? Looks like you might also, yeah, you're also a
Um,
third quarter moon, which
mhm.
is the phase that comes right after the disseminating moon, which is similar, but it's a square. So it has like a edgy feeling, kind of like the third line. It's like, this is my hard earned truth. Let me give it to you.
Yeah, there's something so potent about wisdom that comes out like at that edge that y'all are speaking to here.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm excited for all of us. Yeah, I just have been moving through figuring out who was behind all the accounts that were coming into my space. And I mean, I'm not 100% sure, but it's someone that it had been all love as far as I knew. I don't even know what happened.
Yeah,
And
that's so
it's so
real.
scary to then just
It's
open your heart to
so
loving again
scary.
the community. Like anyone could be someone that could
The
turn
rug just gets swept
just
out from
like
under
bloody.
you.
I don't even understand.
It does feel like there's like a naivety lost. That's how it's felt for me. Like, I was kind of oblivious to the projections for a lot of my life. And
Hmm.
then it was like these last few years, I was shown what was happening and I couldn't unsee it. And it definitely was destabilizing. And I, I stopped existing in a state of like trust.
Hmm.
And like that's the thing, the harsh truth about it, the challenging heretical truth about it is that we will not escape this dynamic. You will disappoint someone again. Someone will put you on a pedestal and knock you off of it again, because this is just the mechanics of reality with this frequency in your system. So, we have to acknowledge it, we have to validate it for one another, like that's something that, again, I think fifth lines are able to do for each other very well, because a lot of times someone will treat me so horribly in front of my closest people for a year, and then my closest friends won't see it until something specific happens that they're able to identify as a projection, and I'm like, this person has been projecting onto me like every time we've encountered them our whole lives, but like, if you're not familiar with that dynamic in the way that only fifth lines are really required to become, then you won't see it, so part of the purpose of this is like letting each other know this is real, like this is a real part of your experience, like you are villainized and guruified, and they go hand in hand, and you are not seen for yourself. Like, you are dehumanized because you play a character for people
Yeah.
that is intentionally simplified in order for your role, your practical role, to happen. But you have to be the one. Here's some like Chiron and Aries medicine. You have to be the one to validate your worth and your existence and trust the deep, complex, nuanced humanness of you. Trust in the inherent goodness. You can't outsource that to
Mm.
someone else. And then as you embrace that sometimes challenging truth, so much opens up, and suddenly the threat of being misunderstood, of being labeled bad, of having someone that you love and trust turn on you one day, or having a stranger decide that you're bad, that threat just begins to hold a lot less weight because you know that you'll be okay anyways, because you're no longer outsourcing your sense of security and like inherent sense of goodness onto them.
Yes, 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 yes. Thank you. Yeah, I'll just add that what lights up for me too is the power of unshaming
Yes.
in this process, because the shame parts of me will find some ways, some reason to
Yes.
believe someone's story about me.
They live in your undefined centers. Like they live there and they echo loudly. And I totally get that. And yeah, I think that's part of why before we started recording, I was telling you how sometimes I read your stuff and I'm just like, this is like me. Like I could have said, like I just feel so deeply resonant with your expression that sometimes I'm like, wait, did I say that or did Britton say that? Like it's just so close. We have a lot of synastry, but a lot of it is this fifth line stuff. And for me, like a moment of realization pertaining to all this fifth line stuff and projection stuff was about shame, because I had this like epiphany in a moment where I don't consider anyone else to be ultimately good or bad or right or wrong. Like I'm so divested from that binaried way of perceiving the world, which doesn't mean my mind doesn't do it, because our minds can only think in the binary, but there's this awareness that can transcend it and divest from the binary way that our minds present information to us. And so it's not that I don't encounter binary thinking, it's just I'm not invested. When my mind starts speaking to me in narratives of good, bad, right, wrong, I'm like, oh, I'm gotten sucked into something other than the truth. So when I start to notice that I'm judging someone in a binary way, I just divest from whatever my mind's saying in that moment, right? So I had this epiphany one day where I was like, I would not decide that anyone else is good or bad or right or wrong, except for some reason when someone else decides that I am bad or wrong, it's believable to me. So it was just like, I don't remember how it happened, but it was just this moment of realization I had at some point in the last couple of years where I realized I was the only person that I was allowing myself to diagnose as purely bad or purely wrong. And something about seeing that I would never like put that on another being outside of me, but for some reason I was accepting those narratives about me when they came to me from the outside. Something about that just like cleared shit away. And ever since then, again, it's not that I don't temporarily get tied up in it, but it's like my emotional authority has shown me now that the truth is that that's just a part of my experience, is those fleeting moments of thinking I'm bad, and they're not true. So when I'm getting that coming to me from the outside, now I'm just like, all right, this is the movie we're in for right now. But I don't get so swallowed up in it where I like truly on an existential level doubt my like worthiness as a human being or doubt that I'm like poison and the worst thing that's ever hit the planet, you know, that I'm a somehow like just a harmful device that everyone encounters and hurts them.
Oh
Which
my
is,
God.
I've believed that about myself at some points because people have acted that way about me at some points, you know, and I think the
Yeah.
other fifth lines have all experienced that too.
Yeah. Like we clearly could talk forever. Everyone just come join us in Heretic Haven so we can keep having this really powerful conversation. It feels emergently like a larger collective conversation
It
that
feels
we're all
very,
being invited into.
very these eclipses, very Chiron and Aries to me, and in some ways Pluto and Aquarius too.
Oh, thank you so much for coming on Moon to Moon, Kelsey. We'll be
Thank
seeing
you,
a lot
Brittany.
of you soon.
Should I
Thank you so much, Kelsey. That was so fun. I really, really, really love listening to you talk and witnessing your brilliance and your wisdom. So excited to keep going in Heretic Haven. Again, for everyone listening who wants to join us, we begin April 10th. And the code to get $55 off enrollment for finding out about this through me is Moon to Moon 55. All one word, Moon to Moon 55. And you can apply that to the pay in full or the payment plans. So thank you so much. Here on the other side of this fun conversation, I do want to make an announcement because I don't know if there's going to be another Moon to Moon before this event that I am dreaming into being, which is inspired by Aries, inspired by the eclipses, being in the belly between, inspired by Mercury stationing retrograde here. It's a wild time. It's a time when it can feel really amazing to feel supported and to feel like resources are available to you. And I was reflecting on how I have lots of resources. I got a whole shit ton of resources in my vault in Teachable. Like, I have so much that I could share. I've never really done a thing like this that I'm calling the Cardinal Fire Sale. Get it? Fire sale, Cardinal Fire, Aries. Pretty good, pretty good. I got to hand that to Matt Bull. That was my boyfriend's genius. I haven't created the full aesthetic here or where I really land the title. So maybe when you actually see me announce this in the next 24 or 48 hours, I will have found some other name, maybe something else will drop in and it will be a Cardinal Fire Sale will be the subtitle. Who knows? It doesn't matter, but I care about these things because words carry magic. Point is, I'm going to be doing a major sale on all these courses that I have in my vault, including teaching material on astrology, old soft strength, which many of you have heard of. It's in the lore as one of my main classes, much beloved. Wildly Alive, my program for cultivating cultivating fire with skill in your life, working with Aries, Leo, and Sag and the ruling planets. All the Unshaming the Signs are going to be deep discounted. Workbooks are going to be discounted. Cave Space is going to be discounted. Big. But it's going to be fire sale, it's going to be a big spark that erupts. And it's this window of time is the window. I think it's going to be March 31st and April 1st because Saturn's on my sun for the first time on the 31st, and then Mercury stations retrograde the 1st, and it's exactly between the eclipses. So it's the literal belly here between, and just let all this stuff just flow out because it's just sitting there, it's just sitting there. And why not? I like the ritual magic around promotion and actual starts and finishes feel very kinky, sexy to my Capricorn moon. But also, why the fuck not? Especially for people that love self-pacing and are autodidacts and they don't need the live meetups. They're good at asynchronous learning. And for you who just is a self-leading hermit, you're gonna take the lantern for yourself and light all this shit up. Because the charting your course teachings I'm going to be sharing are the foundational courses for astrologers that have gone on to become insanely talented astrologers, people like Jonathan Coe and Rebecca Paget and Mariela Rosario, Lauren Margulies. And I'm not going to be including like live meetup recordings, but I'll be all of the teachings were pre-recorded transmissions. So I'll just share all that in the handouts that I offered for everyone to do it in like a self-paced way. Since I'm currently not teaching astrology and I'm not really clear what that's going to look like in the future, because I feel like my guides are taking me into the unknown, where like astrology 101 type templates are that's just not what I'm here to do. I'm not sure yet, but all that stuff's just sitting there. So if you're hearing this and it's before March 31 or April 1, hop on into my newsletter or my Instagram if you're not there, so that you can get all the info. Because this just feels like a fun little experiment. See what happens. And hopefully it will feel really abundant for everyone. So, all right. Thank you so much. I hope everyone's doing all right here. Remember to create lots of spaciousness around yourself in this very activating time. For weeks ahead, it's kind of like this. So, this is a really beautiful time to be active listener and observer of your life, to be deeply in a noticing practice if you have one. It's one of the big things that I teach is the noticing practice. And you don't have to move on any of the data until more data comes in and you begin to see the whole pattern and you begin to see the whole picture. I've at least found these to be very skillful ways to work with eclipse energy, and as well as Mercury retrograde energy. Is like we're being guided, and it's a journey, and we don't have all the information yet, So it's a great time to practice listening and observing and noticing and just keeping like a data collection. And just being in that like trust place of like, I don't have to do anything until I have more clarity. I don't have to do anything until more of the pieces of the puzzle have appeared. I don't have to do anything until more of the story has been written, that I can like then jump in and start directing it somewhere, This just helps me. I hope it helps you. Sending you lots of love. And one more time, hoping to see you in Heretic Haven. Cheers.